The sun had barely crested London's skyline when the Good Morning Britain studio began its familiar morning ballet. Camera operators adjusted their angles with practiced precision, while makeup artists hovered near the interview area, powder compacts at the ready. The air buzzed with the particular energy that comes before a major booking, part excitement, part nervous electricity. Marcus Lane stood in the control room, coffee cooling in his hand as he watched the organized chaos below through the soundproof glass. This wasn't just any Thursday morning segment. Meghan Markle was in the building, and the booking had taken weeks of delicate negotiation. Her team had sent over an approved topics list: charity initiatives, women's empowerment, safe personal anecdotes. The instructions were crystal clear. Steer clear of royal family drama, avoid marriage speculation, keep it professional. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 7:45 a.m., she arrived. Immaculate in an ivory blazer over soft beige trousers, hair pulled into a classic low bun, Meghan moved through the studio with deliberate grace. Her smile was camera-ready, but Marcus noticed something in her posture, chin slightly raised, shoulders squared, that suggested she was prepared for more than pleasantries. Piers was already seated at the interview desk, shuffling through his cards with characteristic confidence. He'd been chosen alongside Susanna Reid for this segment, his reputation for sharp questioning balanced by her diplomatic warmth. As Meghan approached, Piers stood with exaggerated courtesy, his smile just a fraction too wide. "Good morning, Meghan," Susanna said warmly, extending her hand. "Thank you so much for being here." "Good morning," Meghan replied smoothly, her voice carrying that familiar, polished cadence. "This should be interesting." Marcus caught the subtle emphasis on interesting and felt his pulse quicken slightly. In the control room, he leaned toward his production assistant. "Keep the cameras tight on her reactions. Something tells me we're going to want those shots." The opening segment flowed exactly as rehearsed. Under the warm studio lights, Meghan settled into her chair with practiced ease, hands folded, posture perfect. The familiar Good Morning Britain theme faded, and Susanna led with the approved script. "We're delighted to welcome Meghan Markle to discuss her incredible humanitarian work and recent foundation projects," Susanna began, her tone professionally warm. Meghan responded with textbook media training. She spoke eloquently about supporting women entrepreneurs, expanding educational access for young girls, her recent trip to a sustainable farming initiative in Colombia. Her delivery was precise, each answer crafted to inspire while revealing nothing controversial. Piers, to his credit, played along initially. His questions were professional, if pointed. "These projects require significant funding," he noted. "How do you balance the business side with the mission side?" "It's about finding partners who share your values. When your goals align, the resources follow naturally." But Marcus noticed the way Piers' fingers drummed against his question cards, the slight tilt of his head that suggested he was measuring something beyond her words. The executive producer had worked with Piers long enough to recognize the signs. He was a predator calculating distance. "Your foundation's reach has expanded significantly since you relocated," Piers continued, his tone still conversational, but with an undertone that made Susanna glance his way. "Do you see yourself returning to the UK anytime soon? There's still quite a bit of curiosity about your relationship with your former home." The first crack appeared in Meghan's composure, barely perceptible, just a slight tightening around her eyes. "Whether I travel to the UK is entirely my decision, Piers, and frankly, it's interesting that it remains a topic of conversation when there's so much meaningful work to discuss." Susanna, sensing the subtle shift, attempted to redirect. "Speaking of meaningful work, tell us about your upcoming collaboration with—" But Piers wasn't done. "I think viewers are naturally curious about your history there. It was such a significant chapter." Perhaps your viewers should focus more on current issues, Meghan replied, crossing her legs with deliberate precision. Her tone remained light, but the jab was unmistakable. In the control room, Marcus felt the familiar thrill of live television walking the edge. The polished veneer began to show hairline fractures. Piers leaned back in his chair, a gesture that might have looked casual to viewers, but which Susanna recognized as his settling in for battle position. He'd found his opening and had no intention of letting it close. "Since we're talking about public interest," he said, his voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor presenting evidence, "there's been considerable concern about your marriage, reports suggesting strain, separate appearances, rumors of counseling." "Stop." Meghan's voice cut through his words like a blade. Her composure, so carefully maintained, cracked visibly. "My marriage is not your concern, Piers. It's not public property, and it's certainly not fodder for your morning television ratings. But when you're public figures who've built careers on transparency—" "Transparency?" Meghan's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Is that what you call chasing tabloid speculation? Because from where I sit, it looks more like desperation for content." Susanna, recognizing the interview was careening toward disaster, jumped in with practiced smoothness. "Meghan, I'd love to hear about your recent children's book project. The illustrations look absolutely beautiful. And the message about self-acceptance?" "Yes, thank you, Susanna," Meghan said, visibly gathering herself, grateful for the lifeline. Her voice softened as she described the book's themes, the months of collaboration with the illustrator, her hope that children would see themselves reflected in the pages. For a moment, the studio's temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. But Piers was relentless. The moment Meghan finished her answer, he pounced. "It's interesting that you write about self-acceptance when so much of your public image seems built on controlling exactly how you're perceived." Meghan's eyes flashed. "Control? Or self-respect? There's a difference, though I'm not sure you'd recognize it." The words landed like a slap. In the control room, Marcus gripped his coffee cup, watching the ratings needle spike in real time. This was no longer an interview. It was a blood sport, broadcast live to millions. Piers leaned forward, abandoning any pretense of professional distance. His eyes locked onto Meghan's with predatory focus, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of pent-up criticism. "Here's what I find fascinating, Meghan," he said, her name rolling off his tongue like an accusation. "You've built an entire brand on being authentic, on speaking your truth, but isn't your truth remarkably selective?" The studio fell silent except for the mechanical whir of cameras. Even the crew seemed frozen, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Meghan's jaw tightened. "Selective? How, exactly?" "You speak about privacy when it suits you, publicity when it benefits you. You left the royal family citing media intrusion, then signed multi-million-dollar deals with streaming platforms. You claim to want a quiet life while courting every major celebrity in Hollywood." Piers's voice grew stronger with each word, as if he'd been waiting years to deliver this particular monologue. "So you're suggesting I should have what? Disappeared? Given up my career, my voice, my ability to support causes I believe in? Because that's what you wanted, isn't it? For me to simply vanish." "I wanted honesty," Piers shot back, "not this carefully curated version of events where you're always the victim." The accusation hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Meghan's face went very still, very pale, and for a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, she simply stared at him, her face cycling through shock, hurt, and finally something much more dangerous. Then, with deliberate precision, she reached up and removed her earpiece. "Say that again," she said quietly, her voice carrying a deadly calm that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. Piers, either oblivious to the precipice he'd just stepped over or simply past caring, doubled down. "Entitled. Out of touch. I said what I said." The studio, held its collective breath. In the control room, Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized they'd crossed a line from which there was no return. This wasn't dramatic television anymore. This was a public execution. And he'd handed Piers the axe. Meghan stood slowly, her movements controlled but final. "I will not sit here and be disrespected like this," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent studio. "This isn't journalism, Piers. This is cruelty masquerading as entertainment." She began unhooking her microphone with steady hands, each movement deliberate and irreversible. "I came here in good faith to discuss work that matters, and you've turned it into a character assassination." Piers watched her preparations to leave with something between satisfaction and disbelief, as if he hadn't quite expected his gambit to work so completely. The moment Meghan stood and began removing her microphone, every camera in the studio instinctively pivoted to capture the historic unraveling. Years of television training kicked in. This was the moment that would be replayed endlessly, dissected frame by frame, turned into countless memes and hot takes. "Meghan, please," Susanna said, rising half out of her chair, her voice carrying genuine concern. "Perhaps we can take a moment." "No," Meghan said, firmly, her voice cutting through Susanna's attempt at mediation. "There's no coming back from this. I've spent years dealing with exactly this kind of treatment, and I won't do it anymore. Not here, not anywhere." She handed her microphone to a nearby production assistant with the kind of dignity that somehow made the gesture feel more devastating than if she'd thrown it down in anger. Every movement was measured, controlled, a masterclass in maintaining composure while delivering a devastating rejection. Piers, perhaps realizing too late that he'd miscalculated, called after her. "So this is how you handle difficult questions? You just walk away?" Meghan paused at the edge of the set, turning back with a look that could have cut glass. "Difficult questions," she repeated. "That wasn't journalism, Piers. That was a hit job, and you know it." The cameras caught every angle as she walked off set, her straight spine, her measured pace, the way she didn't look back. It was the kind of exit that would define careers and launch 1,000 think pieces about media ethics, public figures, and the line between accountability and abuse. In the control room, Marcus watched his carefully orchestrated morning show implode in real time. Social media notifications were already exploding across multiple screens. Hashtag Meghan Walkoff was trending before she'd even left the building. Susanna, left alone with Piers and millions of viewers, struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "We'll be right back after this break," she managed, though her voice carried none of its usual professional warmth. The damage was done, the footage captured, the moment immortalized. Television history had just been made, and everyone in the studio knew it. The commercial break lasted exactly 90 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Susanna used every moment to try to salvage what remained of the program's credibility, while Piers sat in his chair with an expression that oscillated between triumph and the growing realization that he might have gone too far. When they returned live, Susanna's professionalism was admirable but strained. "Welcome back to Good Morning Britain. As you just witnessed, our interview with Meghan Markle has concluded earlier than planned." But Piers, seemingly incapable of letting sleeping dogs lie, couldn't resist offering his postmortem. "What viewers just saw was exactly what I was talking about. When faced with legitimate questions about her public statements and actions, she chose to control the narrative by walking away." Susanna's jaw visibly tightened. "Piers, I think we should move on." "No, I think this is important," he continued, his voice gaining the fervor of someone convinced of his own righteousness. "Public figures can't simply shut down conversations when they become uncomfortable. That's not how accountability works." What they also can't do, Susanna said, her voice carrying an edge that regular viewers had rarely heard, is expect to be treated with basic human decency during an interview. And perhaps we should ask ourselves whether what just happened served our viewers or simply served other interests. The rebuke was subtle but unmistakable. In the control room, Marcus made the decision he should have made 20 minutes earlier. He signaled his director to cut Piers's microphone and move to the next segment. "We'll be continuing with our scheduled programming," Susanna announced, her relief evident as she shuffled to a new set of notes. "Up next, we'll be discussing the latest developments in the climate summit with our environmental correspondent." But the damage was done. The footage captured, the moment immortalized. Television history had just been made, and everyone in the studio knew it. Within 3 hours of the broadcast, #MeghanWalkoff had become the #1 trending topic worldwide. The clip, Meghan's dignified exit juxtaposed with Piers's entitled comment, had been viewed 17 million times across platforms. The public reaction split along predictable but passionate lines. "Finally, someone called her out," read a viral tweet with 200,000 likes. Piers said what everyone was thinking. But the counter-narrative was equally fierce. Watching a woman of color be publicly humiliated for sport, this is exactly why she left the UK in the first place. Marcus Lane sat in an emergency meeting with ITV executives, laptop open to a spreadsheet showing the morning's rating spike, their highest numbers in 2 years. But the advertising department's phone hadn't stopped ringing, and not all the calls were congratulatory. "We're getting pulled from 3 major campaigns," the head of advertising reported grimly. "Corporate sponsors don't want to be associated with what they're calling ambush journalism." By noon, Meghan's team had released a statement that was a masterclass in public relations jiu-jitsu. This morning's interview demonstrated exactly why meaningful conversations about important issues require mutual respect and good faith. Ms. Markle remains committed to her humanitarian work and looks forward to future opportunities to discuss substantive matters in appropriate forums. Piers, meanwhile, doubled down on social media. "I stand by every question I asked. Public figures must be held accountable, even when they find it uncomfortable." The battle lines were drawn not just around Meghan and Piers, but around larger questions that had been simmering for years. What constituted legitimate journalism versus entertainment? Where was the line between accountability and cruelty? How much deference did public figures deserve, and who got to decide? Media ethics professors would assign the interview as a case study. Late-night comedians would mine it for material for weeks. And somewhere in a California mansion, Meghan Markle had turned off her phone and was probably wondering if walking away had been vindication or simply another chapter in a story she couldn't seem to escape. The morning that was supposed to showcase charity work had instead become a referendum on power, privilege, and the price of fame in the digital age.